So, is it a boy? Is it a girl? What would you like? That tends to be a big question you get asked when you're pregnant. And Channel Mum each month like to give us a selection of topics that we might like to talk about, and one of them this month was gender preference. So that is what I've chosen to talk about, and there's quite a lot around gender preference that I kind of like to get stuck into, and it's stuff I've not really talked about before. Right from the get-go, I want to say I don't have any issues with the setup of children that I have. I have a boy followed by 2 girls, and I absolutely love that. But with all 3 of my pregnancies, I kind of had feelings surrounding different genders, so I'm going to talk about those today. Before we had children, Rich and I both felt, I'm not quite sure what we based this on, but we both felt like we were going to be like a boy family. I kind of pictured myself as being a boy mum. I kind of would have said before I had children that my preference would have been for boys, because having been a teacher, I just felt like boys were just so much easier to deal with. I kind of felt like, yeah, they can be a bit rough and tumbly sometimes, but what you see is what you get with boys, and I feel like girls are a lot more complicated sometimes. So I felt before I had children at all that I just felt like we were gonna end up with a mob of boys, and I was gonna be little mum, and they were all gonna kind of like look after me, and I was gonna be the girl in the family, and that's just kind of how we thought our family was going to be. And I wouldn't say that's how I necessarily wanted my family to be, because I did used to joke about the fact that I was going to have this family of boys, but I was going to keep going until I had a girl, because I liked the idea of experiencing both sides of it. But I just felt like we were going to be a boy family. When we got pregnant the first time, we chose not to find out what we were having. When it's your first baby, I think there isn't a particular pressure either way, and people do ask you whether you'd prefer a boy or a girl, but I think because we knew we were always planning on having more than one, there wasn't a particular pressure to feel like we had to have, or that we wanted to have one gender or the other, because it was our first baby. However, I think if someone had put a gun to my head and told me I could choose, I probably would have chosen a boy. And I just quite liked the idea in the setup of whatever we ended up having one day, of there being this like older brother figure. So I think had I been able to choose, that's what I would have chosen. However, I spent that entire pregnancy convincing myself that I was having a girl. I feel like I did that for self-preservation, really. I felt like, because I think I really did want a boy that first time, if I convinced myself I was having a girl, then I'd be happy to have a daughter, but I would be happily surprised to have a boy. And I felt like that's what I needed to do for me. 19 months later, we obviously had our second, and that time we didn't find out what we were having either. And that time, I would say even more so than the first time, people would ask me whether I had a preference, and that time I genuinely didn't have a preference. I think because we'd always said we wanted more than 2, I didn't feel under pressure to have a girl at that point. Because they were 19 months apart, I felt like in a lot of ways it would be quite nice for it to be another boy, because they'd be really close brothers, but at the same time I was quite happy for it to be girl. I honestly, if someone had told me I could choose second time around, I honestly didn't mind. But that time around, because my pregnancy was really similar to Dylan's, and because I already had a boy, and I kind of felt like I knew how to be a boy mum, I was convinced I was having another boy. Utterly convinced. Like, if someone had asked me to put money on it, I would have been like 95% sure that my second baby was going to be a boy. And then when she was born, I was really surprised when she was a girl, like really surprised. And it wasn't at all that I didn't want her to be a girl, because I was absolutely thrilled to have a daughter, and that I knew that whatever happened I was going to get this experience of both a boy mum and girl mum. But because I had spent 9 months convincing myself I was having a boy, when she was very first born, I almost had this like grieving process for the family that I spent 9 months picturing myself having. I was really thrilled to have her, but at the same time it just wasn't at all what I expected. I wouldn't necessarily say that I would have preferred a boy second time around. I was really thrilled to have a girl, but I'd prepared myself for a boy. It was almost like in the first time around, I'd prepared myself for a girl so that I could be happily surprised by a boy. But the second time around, I prepared myself for a boy. and that surprise element kind of backfired on me a little bit. Loads of people asked me why I prefer the third time. I think because we already had a boy and a girl, we didn't feel like we had anything to prove so much, but I think the dynamics would have been quite different either way, whatever it had been. And I had feelings like it would be nice if it was a boy, because then Evelyn would be the one in the middle, but she'd still get to be special as the little girl. But at the same time, the third baby was obviously going to be closer in age to Evelyn, so it would be nicer for them to both be girls. And that time around, from about 5 or 6 weeks pregnant, I was convinced it was a girl. I just knew. And third time around, we obviously did find out what we were having, and it obviously confirmed my suspicions that it was going to be a girl. I don't know what I would have preferred the third time around. I think because I just knew in my gut so early on that it was going to be a girl, I didn't almost have time to form a preference the third time around, really. Interestingly enough, I think were I to have a fourth, I don't know what my preference would be, because having always said that we felt like we were going to be a kind of boy family, were I to have a fourth, I kind of almost feel like a girl might be nicer for the dynamics. On the flip side of that, I think it would be really nice to have a boy to kind of balance things out a little bit. Before I became a parent, I honestly thought it was going to be all about the boys in this family, and funnily enough, it's ended up being with girl heavy, and I love it. I love my girls and my boy, and I think they're brilliant, all of them, and I love the fact that I get to experience raising girls, raising a boy. In so many ways they're so similar anyway. I think it might just be the stage that I'm at, but with all my children under 5, I kind of feel like you don't necessarily treat boys and girls particularly differently at this stage. Maybe it will come into its own a little bit more as they grow. What's been your take on it? Have you kept trying, like I said I would have done, to get a girl if I'd had loads of boys? I also, funny enough, would have done the same if I'd had girls. I used to joke about the fact that if I had boys first, I would try until number 4 to get a girl, and if I had 4 boys, I'd give up. But I did used to say that if I had girls, I would just keep going to get a boy. So that shows, I guess maybe I wasn't, before I had children, leaning more towards wanting boys, and I've ended up with more girls, and I love it. So whatever your preference is, if you're pregnant at the moment and you're worried about having a preference, just know that it really won't matter once they're here. I don't think you'll ever sit there and go, I wish you'd been a girl. You just won't care. So yeah, that's my take on gender preference. I would absolutely love to hear what you think about gender preference, whether you had gender preferences, whether you were disappointed, whether you were just generally happy, whatever you had. Leave me a comment and let me know what you think, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!